Hi, everybody. I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott, and this is Right Angle, brought to you by the paying members of BillWhittle.com. You know, last week, or maybe it was 2 weeks ago, Scott, you did a segment on this divided America, that red and blue just don't see the same country. And it occurred to me over the last week that really this is nowhere plainer than in the mainstream media versus kind of the alternate media, if you want to call it that. It started as a blogosphere about 15 years ago, and now it's everywhere from BillWhittle.com to Instapundit to, well, just everything you might read that isn't the New York Times or the Washington Post. And it's really coming to a head with Donald Trump, the Russia collusion story. You've got now maybe Jeff Sessions is going to get fired or forced out as Attorney General. And the news is going crazy. Respected journalists and anthropologists out of WashU and St. Louis, Sarah Kendzior, just tweeted this morning in this as part of a multi-tweet rant about the Russia collusion story. What you will be left with unless powerful people act is a dynastic, kleptocratic Russian proxy state controlled by mafioso-style rule. And what she said there isn't that far off from what you're seeing in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the NBC Nightly News, and certainly on MSNBC. But if you look at the alternative news sources, you know, we're still trying to figure this one out. We see a Donald Trump who's doing nothing to help Russia. We're seeing an administration that may be a little chaotic, but is certainly not a mafia enterprise. Scott, what is this divide? Where are we going? Can we keep on this track?
Well, I think if the more you use a term like "we," the more you associate yourself with the bad actors in the business. You know, and I think this is sort of a mistake of the left, where you know, it's like Joe Biden, who, by the way, used to be vice president of the United States.
I did not know that.
Before that, a U.S. senator, actually, a little known fact. But anyway, you know, when Joe Biden says we're better than this, it is a collectivist way of looking at things and saying, well, why are we like this? So I have this tendency to kind of, maybe that's this slight sort of love of people with Asperger's and autism in me, that because I see a lot of myself in them, that I'm aloof from that a little bit. And I say, you know what? I don't think it's really we. I think there are people in a particular line of work who think they have a lot of influence, who think they're really important, who go out there and have a particular point of view, and they want to make the country look like it's ripped apart. In our day-to-day lives, yeah, there are people who disagree with each other, but for the most part, we're trying to get our kids to, you know, ball practice, and we're trying to, you know, pick up the groceries or have them delivered by Amazon, or, you know, however you do that. We have lives to live, and, you know, you see those joke videos online that conservatives love to, you know, laugh into their hands about. They walk around with pictures of Ronald Reagan, and they say, do you know who this is? And they go, no, I have no idea. And then later they show a picture of Kim Kardashian. Everybody knows who Kim Kardashian is. Well, that is actually kind of a refreshing thing for me. I'm almost glad that there aren't that many people really paying attention to this, you know, blood sport for ugly people. One of the biggest news items
that was
of the week.
Sly, Scott. I caught that.
NBC News just tweeted out or sent out a press release that said, for the first time in its 21-year history, MSNBC won the daytime ratings. And they won those daytime ratings by having 2.3 million viewers. They edged out Fox News with 2.3 million viewers during the day. That's some, I forget which time block or which demographic for that matter. But anyway, I started to think, well, what is 2.3 million? Wow, that is nigh on 0.7% of the American public is actually watching MSNBC at any given time. And if you lump them all together, you may have 1% or 2% of people who are really tuned into this stuff.
Yeah.
So I actually draw comfort from that. I don't think we're a country ripped apart. I think that there are a bunch of people who are making a lot of money by making it look that way, just like the WWE promoters make money by ginning up a fight among people who are acting.
All right, that seems like a sober analysis, which isn't exactly my specialty. That's why we got you here. Bill, I'm watching people I respect in the news media, in the blogosphere. John Schindler's name comes to mind. He's a former NSA spook, one of the sharpest people around. His Hillary analysis in 2015 and 16 was so spot on. It was almost frightening how sharp he was. But when he starts talking about Russia, he sounds like a slightly less paranoid version of Louise Mensch, who was, just bat stuff crazy, bat guano, right? So why are people with solid reputations throwing all that away by parroting Louise Mensch?
Well, interestingly enough, I've been reading a bit lately about the first migration out of Africa and genetic just genetic spread throughout the world and how it happened and so on. And because now with incredible DNA technology, they can trace you back where you came from, what part of England, that kind of thing. So they're able to reconstruct the human family history. And in order to get a divergence, what you need a separation. If there's a lot of intermarrying among a population, the gene pool is pretty much standard across that population. You only begin to get drift between people and changes between people when you have these two populations that become separated, and there's zero or very little crossing of the boundaries. So now this group of people is basically interbreeding with themselves, and so is this group over here, and they can start to diverge. And that seems to me to be what's happening, not with the genes, but the memes. And I mean meme in a big sense, not in the little picture of a cat sense. When the left made an attempt, extraordinarily successful attempt, to take information and turn it into editorializing without making the distinction, what they were basically doing is they were putting like a gigantic ocean of an uncrossable ocean or a mountain range between people that had one set of information and people that had another set of information. And since there was very little information crossing back and forth because of these cultural divides and these information divides, you begin to get these two different populations. One population has this set of information and the other population has a completely different set of information, and now they look at each other and they can't understand a word that either one of them is saying, although they both originated from the same place with the same common language. And so it's basically what's happening. We're still speaking English, most of us anyway, and nevertheless, the cultural memes have separated so much that we now look at each other and just, they blah, blah, blah. Sorry, what? I'm going to try that again. And that's really what's happening. So they've been prepped by 8 years of Obama's the light worker, and he's the greatest thing that ever happened, and he's the most wonderful guy, and conservatives are racist, and all this other stuff. And we've been prepped by they're all communists and so on, and they're out to destroy the country. And the fact that, we're correct and they're not shouldn't really bear on the argument, I suppose. But nevertheless, that's what it is, Steve. So I was out for the weekend, and I was waiting for the shuttle in the morning, very early, 3:30 in the morning to come home. And there was a USA Today magazine on the newspaper on the counter at the hotel, and it was like, country 50-50 divided in terms of impeachment. Really?
Impeachment? How did we get to impeachment already?
Well, so I think what I just said was an explanation of how we got where we are and where we are. But I think the emotional driver is that the analogy I just made breaks down a little bit only because we get information from them, but they get no information from us. We get to hear them all the time. We have no choice. We the movie stars, the Academy Awards, late night comedy, music, all of it. We have to hear it. And I think since they never did hear from us, the great, hairy, unibrow, knuckle-dragging racist savages up in the hills, the fact that we came, yeah, me too. The fact that we came down out of the mountains and just basically walloped their caravan, has left them in a state of emotional shock and despair and rage. And so you get these frothing at the mouth lunacies. And we did that to some extent with Obama. There were occasionally times when people would say this or that about Obama. I'd say, listen, there's enough wrong about the guy that's real that you don't really need to be inventing all this stuff. But they're not as well adapted to take it as we are, because we're memologically more fit than they are because we are exposed to their pathogens, all the time. So there you go.
Bill, you reminded me of the story from the scriptures of the Tower of Babel, and as that ended, the Lord confused their speech and scattered them across the face of the earth. And I think what's happened in this situation is the Lord has confused our speech, but we all stayed in Babel.
Well, that's actually precisely what happened, because the Lord basically has divided the population of that city into two parts and given each part a separate language. Not a million different languages. Half of the city's now speaking one language, half of the city speaking the other language, and they both grew up there, and they both say this is our home, and they both know where all the stores are, and and they know the
it's like living in
tower.
Freaking Quebec.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly. It's like living in You know what? That's actually a pretty good analogy, Scotty, because it's like living in freaking Quebec, where every single thing really has two different markers on it. There's the English translation and there's the French translation for every building, every street, every poster, everything. And we are able to read one and they're able to read the other. And so it's small wonder that these things get so nutty.
Hey Scott, Bill got into this a little bit, but I want to get your answer too. Kind of a soul searching, really thoughtful, honest answer. What we've come to expect from you after all these years. For 8 years we were in just steadfast opposition to almost everything President Obama tried to do. But really, were we as nuts on the right? Were we as crazy as the Rachel Maddows and even the Bill Cristols have gotten with the anti-Trump stuff?
Well, again, I reject your use of the word "we." However, there were some among us who had to dab a little foam from the corner of his mouth every once in a while. I don't mean anybody on this show, but yeah. I can remember times when people that I, generally respected, just as Bill had kind of indicated, where you said, hey, look, there's enough that we can legitimately prove that's wrong about this administration. You don't have to go making stuff up. And I think that we do get into this kind of a loop mode where it doesn't matter what the other side does. There's no way they can redeem themselves. Every single thing the other side does must be seen as either stupid or evil or both, or somehow I'm corrupt for suggesting otherwise. And I think anytime you do that, you've slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. You've lost touch with your ability to reason, with your ability to weigh arguments. And basically you start with the assumption that, hey, if you and I get together in a room, I don't have to give you the time of day because you're a lying devil. And there's just nothing that can be done I'm not going to try to educate you. I'm not going to try to win you as a friend because you've got nefarious purposes and there's nothing we can do to change that. And I'd like to see us be among the first, and I think we have in many cases, to take that step to say, you know what, I'm going to keep an open mind all the time, even when I'm talking to people who seem on the face of it to be, to have utterly lost touch with reality. I'm going to listen, I'm going to try to learn, and I'm going to try to apply reason and try to be gracious.
I just want to add
Sure.
that while I do think this distinction that I made is there, I just want to say again, I don't think that this is equivalent. I don't think that the sides are equally wrong.
I'm not saying they're equally wrong, but have we both lost our heads from time to
equally
time?
misinformed.
Yeah.
They're scrambling to find some sort of memo or some sort of little email hint that Donald Trump may have done something. We saw Barack Obama on camera say to the Russian ambassador, if you tell Vladimir to give me a little room here and I can be a lot more flexible after the election. We saw Hillary Clinton sell 25% of the United States uranium reserves to Russia, and all of a sudden she's got $100 million. And these stories sit there like these mountains as they go burrowing around in the little wormholes at the base, trying to find like bacteria that they can trumpet around.
Yeah, if you want to talk about collusion in Russia, Hillary Clinton, she came out against fracking, which would just filled Russia's coffers. The uranium story, of course, that even the New York Times reported on very briefly 2 years ago. No other candidate would have survived the kind of scrutiny that should have been brought to bear on Clinton. But folks, let me tell you what I think's going on here. If Eisenhower were retiring today, I think instead of warning us about the military-industrial complex, he'd be warning us about the Democrat media complex. It's what I called the deep state before deep state had been coined. And this Democrat media complex is really, really hurting. The election of Trump was just another big step in what is hopefully their demise, but is certainly a part of their long-term decline. Now, you go back to 2005, and this Democrat media complex learned how to use something like Katrina to hobble, to neuter a sitting American president, George W. Bush. And of course, Bush did himself no favors with virtually ignoring the Iraqi Civil War for a year and a half while that raged on under his watch. But that said, the media Democrat complex lied, cheated, made stuff up to use Katrina to just absolutely neuter a president. And I'll tell you what I think they're doing now. They need to take this to the next step if they're going to reverse their slow demise. They need to flex their muscles and see if they can take out a sitting president. That's exactly what we're watching here. And if they succeed in this, then they will have figured out a way to have thoroughly corrupted elections in this country. If you can take out a sitting president, you can take out virtually anyone. That's the muscle that they're flexing right now, the skill they're trying to hone. And I maintain that, even after 8 years of Obama, the alternative media has never been more important than it is right now. We have got to fight this thing. We need your help to watch it, or to do it. So keep watching, stay tuned in, keep reading, and keep fighting back, all right? That's the right angle on that. We'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.